Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Addressing Challenging Behaviors. My name is Cody Somerville, and I'm a program specialist here in the Early Childhood Education Division at the Texas Education Agency. I'm excited to spend the next 45 minutes or so with you talking about an important topic and supporting our youngest learners. So before we get started, just want to explain a few of the functionalities of GoToWebinar. Everyone should see a control panel that looks similar to the one that's here on the PowerPoint slide. You can use the orange arrow at the top to expand or collapse your control panel. There's also a chat box and question box, and you can use the drop-down menu to respond to one of the organizers or to the whole group. I do ask that you limit questions to the content being presented. As we think about today's content of challenging behaviors, we want to make sure that we are not typing any scenarios of specific students in, that might be in your classroom. So please limit your questions to content that I am presenting, and we will talk about how to get specific help with particular students that you might have in mind as we go through today's webinar. Some of those resources that I want you to be thinking about as we go through today's webinar that might help you with those particular students that you have in mind are teachers on your campus, your administrators, neighboring school districts, your education service center staff, and nonprofit and professional organizations. There is a handout that contains a list of resources in the handout box of the control panel. And it also provides a list of web-based resources and books that you might consider when trying to find solutions for particular students. Today, we're going to cover quite a bit. We'll start by talking on how we can use developmentally appropriate practices to mitigate unwanted behaviors. Then we'll jump into a little bit about brain development and how that relates to student behavior. We'll talk about the differences between little problems and big problems and appropriate solutions for both of those. We'll also jump into some practices that we would hope you would avoid as teachers and administrators, and we'll also talk about teachers' responses to behaviors. We'll close out our time together by sharing some additional resources as well. There are often unwanted behaviors in the classroom. These behaviors are not necessarily challenging behaviors, but when displayed frequently and by multiple children, it can be overwhelming for the teacher. Most of these behaviors can be mitigated when ensuring we are utilizing developmentally appropriate practices in the classroom. There are three main developmentally appropriate practices that can be easily used to mitigate unwanted behaviors. These include making sure we're matching instructional practices to meet the needs of the developmental needs of young children, making sure our learning environments are safe, welcoming, and support self-regulation, and lastly, that we're building positive relationships with family. When we think about matching our instructional practices to the developmental needs of students, we have to consider a few different things. The first is the age of students and what the developmental characteristics of the specific age group is that you're working with, but also the needs of the particular student. We know that young children learn best when they're provided a variety of play opportunities and time to engage in play. The time to engage in play is the critical point here. We often see play in our classrooms, but it's very limited. We want to make sure that children have plenty of time for open-ended free play throughout the day. We also want to make sure that the right amount of challenge is being used to foster learning and avoid frustration. If we ask too much of our youngest learners, it can be overwhelming, and their only way to let us know that their needs are not being met is by exhibiting challenging behaviors. We can make sure that we're providing the right amount of challenge when we provide scaffolded learning experiences that build upon one another. So we have to spend time thinking about the sequences of our curriculum to make sure that we are building up the skills that are necessary for children to learn more difficult concepts. We also want to make sure that we embed intentional learning experiences that teach explicit skills related to self-regulation. As teachers, we often take for granted that our children arrive in our classrooms with these self-regulation skills, but because they are young children, this is often not the case. And it's our job to make sure that we're providing the learning experiences children need in order to develop these critical skills. When we think about using our learning environments, there's two things that we want to consider: the physical layout of the classroom, but also our classroom community. Both of these elements make up our learning environment. As it relates to the physical arrangement or layout of our classroom, we want to make sure that the furniture is the appropriate size for students in the classroom. This helps make sure that they're physically supported by the furniture and materials in the classroom to acquire the skills that they need. We also want to make sure that the materials that are used to foster learning and development are connected to the interests of the children that we're teaching and also reflect their diversity. If children are not engaged because they're not interested in the materials, this often leads to unwanted behaviors. Young children can often get overwhelmed. There's a lot of new things happening in the classroom, a lot of new experiences and new people, and they often need a quiet, calm place where they can go to regroup and to process their feelings. So we want to make sure that there is an area that children have access to for this purpose. This is different than a timeout area. This is not timeout. This is a self-selected quiet place where children can go to process their thoughts and their feelings. When thinking about our classroom communities, a strong classroom community offers children authentic opportunities for meaningful connection. Connection helps children feel safe and supports optimal social and emotional development. Connection can occur by providing children with jobs that contribute to the classroom community, using rituals such as greetings and transition songs designed to promote unity, and allowing students to help develop classroom rules. We also want to make sure that as teachers and administrators, we value problem solving and conflict resolution by teaching children how to engage in these processes and providing them time to use these tools. We want to make sure that when conflict arises or a child have a problem, that we don't immediately jump to solving it for them, that we help scaffold these experiences in a way that mitigates their frustration, allows us to move on, but also teaches them what to do next time so they can solve the problem themselves or resolve the conflict themselves. The third developmentally appropriate practice that we hope to see in all classrooms is strong and positive relationships with families. Connections are not only important for children, but also for families. This connection needs to start at the beginning of the year. It will be maintained with an intentional plan for regular communication with all families. Make sure that you are having positive communication with families and not reaching out just because there's a behavior or academic concern. Call families to let them know something positive that their child did. It'll brighten the family's day and let them know that you believe in their child. Always remember that each student in your class is a family's most special person. And how would you like someone to talk about your most special person? Probably not in a negative way. When communicating about behavior, avoid labels and focus on describing behaviors. For example, if a child hits another child, instead of saying, "Your child is mean," say, "Your child hit another child." This avoids the appearance of you judging someone else's most special person. We're now going to move on to talking about child development and how it relates to behavior. Behavior is directly connected to child development. Understanding child development and brain science can help teachers and administrators more effectively support young children experiencing challenging behaviors. Through behavior, children often are communicating needs. They may lack the skills to express their needs in a constructive way, so they're expressing those needs in the only way they know how. Children who have experienced trauma early in life and/or live in environments with toxic stress have especially difficult times controlling their behavior. This is because trauma and toxic stress physically alters the construction of the brain. Children who fall under this category benefit from trauma-informed practices and need extra opportunities for connections with caring adults. Young children's brains are still developing. They may not have all the brain structures in place that are needed to regulate their behavior like adults. Refrain from blaming a child for not following expectations and focus on how you can teach a child the skills they are missing. There are four main causes of challenging behaviors. First is developmental characteristics and how they might mismatch with the environment or expectations. Next is unmet needs. These might be physical needs such as food, clothing, and shelter. They might also be social and emotional needs such as love and support. Children also use behavior to let us know they lack certain skills. This could be academic skills, it could be social skills, and it could be some of our cognitive skills such as problem solving, flexibility and thinking. And the only way they know how to respond is through challenging behaviors. There are also factors in the classroom, such as the way it's laid out, other people in the environment who might elicit challenging behaviors from a particular child. We're now going to watch a video from the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. Often, children who are displaying challenging behaviors lack executive functioning and self-regulation skills. This video explains the importance of those skills. So I'm going to transition over now to this video.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in.
So I think it might be kind of a jerky output on your end. I'm going to give it a moment just to buffer a little bit. On my end, it's pretty smooth. So it might just be the amount of video that's going over the system. Back us up just a little bit.
The center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors. We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Look at your shape. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this? The toolbox.
Tool.
What is executive function?
safety goggles. Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information, avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn. But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves. If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7 and +4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated. The prefrontal cortex, or the front, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years. It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're helping to strengthen those neural connections.
Mom, you're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got hit by my dog in my arm. Oh, dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
So hopefully you found a few of some of that information that was shared in that video helpful. I know it's also always helpful. They said that what is going on in a child's brain is unbelievably intricate and complicated. And it's hard in the heat of the moment in a classroom to remember that. But we have to stop and pause and remember their brains are still developing. And we, as teachers, have the great responsibility and the privilege to being brain developers. And just like they said, it's like going to the gym. It takes practice. Children need different opportunities and experiences to exercise these new skills. So we're now going to jump into looking at little problems and big problems. As teachers and administrators, we must control how we react to children's behavior. This begins by identifying if something is a little problem or a big problem. We're now going to use the poll feature, and I will launch a poll, and you're going to decide if it is a little problem or a big problem. So the first scenario is going to be a child keeps laying down on his stomach during a read aloud, despite several reminders from the teacher to sit crisscross. Is this a little problem or a big problem? Looks like about 55% have voted. We're gonna hold it open just for a few more seconds. Closing in 3, 2, 1. So we can see that 97% said it's a little problem. And that's right. It is a little problem. It's not affecting others. It might be irritating to you as a teacher. You might think it's showing other children that they don't have to follow expectations. But it also may be an indication that the child does not have enough trunk support to sit up for long periods of time. Or it could be that your read aloud is too long and is not matching the developmental characteristics of the students in your classroom. I'm going to move on to our next poll, which is every time a child does not get to go to the center of his or her choosing, the child hits another student. Is this a little problem or a big problem? We're about 65% voted. You can give us just a few more seconds to cast our votes. Closing in 3, 2, 1. So 95% of folks said this is a big problem. And it is a big problem when another child is showing aggression towards another child. But this can be solved easily if you have the right skills. We're now going to show our last scenario. During circle time, a child is making noises, animal noises, while other children are speaking. Is this a little problem or a big problem? And closing in 3, 2, 1. So 78% said it's a little problem. You'll notice that we are a little more split on this one than we were on the others. It is a little problem, but can definitely seem like a big problem when you're in the middle of circle time and you don't know what to do. There's a number of reasons this child could be making animal noises. One could be circle time is just going way too long. The second is You've never given this child a chance to speak throughout circle time, and so they're doing the only thing that they know how to get other people's attention, and that is by mooing like a cow. So let's talk about the characteristics of a little problem and the characteristics of a big problem. Little problems are developmentally typical and do not affect the safety of others and can be addressed with simple strategies. Examples of little problems include not cleaning up properly, cutting in line, not lining up immediately from recess, talking when not supposed to. Those are things that happen all the time that can be addressed through simple strategies, some of which we'll talk about in a moment. Big problems affect the safety of others, and they affect the child's ability to learn or engage in pro-social interactions. And these often require intervention or targeted supports. Examples of big problems include physical aggression, tantrums, or significant disruptions. So let's turn our attention to discussing how we address those little problems. First is by teaching the desired behavior. Children do not always know what is expected. Young children's working memory is still developing, and just because you said it back at the beginning of the school year doesn't mean they're going to remember in October. It's time to re-teach. Plan time to teach your desired behaviors at the beginning of the school year and when new students join the class. Also, as you notice children forgetting expected and desired behaviors throughout the year, pause and take time to teach again. Make sure you explain the expectation and why it is needed. This can occur through modeling the expectation or using something like a social story. It's also important for children to practice the expectation so they know what it looks like, they know what it sounds like, they know what it feels like. A good way of doing this is by having half the class model and half the class watch, and then switch. Also, if students do not follow expectations, remind them of the expectations and take time to practice again. This might require some one-on-one coaching sessions. So if a certain child is having difficulty with a specific behavior, make time in your day to pull them aside and teach them the expectation. We also want to focus on reinforcing the positive behaviors. This can be accomplished through acknowledging a child who is doing what is expected. So if you're in circle time and you do have that child who's making animal noises, instead of addressing them, address another student who is doing the right thing. We want to acknowledge the child, though, when they are doing what is expected. So if you have that child who often is doing what is not expected, be on the lookout for those few opportunities where you do have the chance to praise them for doing the right thing. When we are praising students for following expectations, we want to avoid general praise, such as good job or good girl or good boy. We really want to name what we see. For example, I see Scott is following expectations. He has his listening ears on and is sitting with a calm body. This shows or reinforces what the expectation is and also gives other students a visual of what the expectation is. Another strategy for addressing little problems is changing it up. Children's behaviors are often the way they express their needs, and many little problems are often a cue that it is time to move on. This might be moving on to the next lesson, or providing a brain break, or just changing your setting. So maybe you have children sitting on the carpet and you are getting halfway through a read aloud and you can see they're starting to be restless or little problems are starting to pop up, have everyone go to their tables and read to them while they're at their tables. A simple change in the setting can help mitigate some of the little problems that you are seeing. So let's turn our attention to addressing big problems. Big problems can often seem daunting and overwhelming. So it's important to focus on one behavior at a time. Well, how do you decide what that one specific behavior is going to be? Well, think about it from your perspective. What's that one specific behavior that if it went away, would just make your life a little easier? This is often what I like to start with because I know it'll help me when I am trying to regulate my reactions to this child. But make sure you're choosing something manageable. This might require you to break larger behaviors into smaller components. So for example, if a child is disruptive all the time, they might be getting up and getting into cabinets when they're not supposed to. This might be you're walking down the hallway and they decide just to start sitting in the middle of the hallway. They're doing many things that are really disruptive. We'll choose one of those specific things. It might be, I want this particular student to sit during circle time through the whole circle time. And you know, if they're going to sit in the middle of the hallway when we're walking down the hallway, I'm going to let it go because we're focusing on sitting through circle time. It's also important to remember that you're not going to change big behaviors and big problems overnight. It's going to take time. Some strategies that you can use to address these big problems is creating a behavior plan with the family's input. Invite them to the classroom for a conference. Make sure that you're using positive language to describe their child and you're not using labels to judge their child, but you're describing the specific behaviors that you are seeing. Ask them if they are seeing the same kinds of behaviors at home. What strategies are they using at home that is getting the results that they want? Use them to help you think about what strategies you might utilize in school. One of my favorite strategies for addressing big problems is creating a social story that teaches the targeted behavior. When you create a social story, it's often important to use the child's name in the story, and if possible, to incorporate pictures of the child demonstrating the targeted behavior. I like to provide the family a copy of the story. They can read it at home before they come to school to help the child start their day off right. And make reading the story with the child a routine. This might be right after announcements in the morning, or when you're at recess, you pull them aside and you read the story together. It does take some time to build these stories, but what I found as a teacher is that over a few years, you have children who are going to be working on the same behaviors. And so if you keep those stories saved, then all you have to do is change the child's name and change the pictures. If you're not able to use actual pictures of the child, make sure you're using simple clip art that doesn't have a lot of things in the background and is just a stick figure or a cartoon person demonstrating the very specific skill that you want. So there's not a lot of distracting images on the page. It's often helpful to also establish a signal or a visual cue. This might be using a sign language sign as a reminder for that child to display a certain behavior. It could be if you tug on your ear and you wink at a student, they know what it means. But before using a signal or a visual cue, you're going to have to set time aside to practice with the child. You could also find visual cue cards that you might make small copies of and put on your lanyard around your neck that you can hold up as visuals to that child to show them what they need to do. Children process visual images much quicker than they process verbal information. So for our young learners who are trying to process a whole lot, often using a visual or either a visual cue on as a picture or some hand signal is going to be more effective than barking an order at them. You can also provide a peer model. Make sure this is set up in an equal manner so that the peer model is not the peer enforcer, but they're someone who you can trust, who will use kind and caring language to remind their friend what is the expected behavior. When you're implementing strategies, it's important to have frequent check-ins with the child. These can be done by a support staff member who becomes the child's check-in buddy, and they have a certain time of the day where they stop in to check in with that child. As I said earlier, children who are coming from environments where there is toxic stress or might have experienced early trauma in life need more opportunities for positive connections with adults. To achieve this, it's often helpful to bring in another staff member to help with these check-ins and establish another positive connection with an adult for that child. Make sure you set a check-in schedule and you stick to it. It's helpful to create some visual reminder of that schedule for the child so they know when it's going to be and it's never a surprise. Check-ins should focus on reinforcing targeted behaviors and focus on building a positive relationship with the child. Big problems require big relationships. Children who are exhibiting big problems need more positive relationships, more opportunities to connect with others, and to know that a strong positive relationship with his or her teacher is unconditional. Through all of this, we are building trust, and trust is a key ingredient for changing behavior. Ways that you can establish these positive relationships is building time into your schedule to connect with the child. I know that when I was teaching, some of the ways that I would do this is I would make time to eat lunch with that particular child, or maybe in the morning if I knew they were a kid who got here bright and early and maybe were waiting down in the cafeteria or the gym or outside in the hallway, I would invite them in and we would work on different things in the morning to help us get ready for our day. I might also take time at recess to push that child on the swing. Sometimes if they're needing some extra attention, I might hold them back just for a few minutes from specials, and we would have a read aloud together. Whatever you choose, make sure that you build it into your schedule and it's something that's sustainable. It doesn't need to be something that takes a whole lot of time, but is very impactful within a short few minutes. When we are trying to address challenging behaviors, there are several practices that we want to avoid. We want to avoid taking away recess. Often our children who are experiencing challenging behaviors need that open-ended time for large gross motor movement. And we are working against ourselves when we take away recess from them. They need that time to burn off the energy. So find other ways to let them know that their behavior is not wanted than taking away recess. We also want to avoid taking away centers. Play is a critical tool for building a student's brain. And when we take away opportunities for them to play, we are taking away opportunities for their brain to be fully developed. Play is the only way that certain parts of our brain can be developed. And so we are further hindering that child from building the brain that they need to then exhibit the skills and knowledge and behaviors that we would hope. We also want to avoid using clip charts and color charts. These do not teach children what to do. They teach children what not to do, but then they often don't know what to do instead. Children are doing the best they can. They are showing you the skills and knowledge that they do have. So when a child is talking out of turn, or a child throws a tantrum by saying, go move your clip down or change your color to red, you're not building the skills that teach them what to do instead. Happy and sad face family notifications do not provide families enough context about behavior. They can only say to their child, I see you had a sad face day. What did you do? A child may not remember. When a child is throwing a tantrum or exhibiting a really challenging behavior, their brain does not have the capacity to store that memory and for a child to recall that later in the day. When communicating about behavior with family, we want to name specific behaviors. We also don't want to label an overall day by one specific behavior. The child had a tantrum at 8:30 a.m., but they had a great rest of the day, but you gave that child a sad face for the whole day. That does not acknowledge all of the positive things that they did do. We also want to avoid using treasure boxes. These do not build intrinsic motivation, and they teach children we only have to do what we're supposed to because I'm getting a reward. And that is not how life works. We also want to avoid timeout because it's taking away learning opportunities from children. If they are missing out on instruction, it puts them further behind and could increase frustration as we move on to new concepts and skills in our instruction that that child did not have the opportunity to learn. We also want to avoid publicly shaming a child, yelling at a child, calling them names. Big acts of disappointment and shame are not helpful to supporting a child's social and emotional development. It does not show them that there is a caring adult who genuinely wants to help them acquire the skills that they need to be successful in life. As a reminder, a child below grade 3 may not be suspended unless they have violated the penal code or possess drugs and alcohol. This new piece of statute was enacted just a few legislative sessions ago, and just want to make sure that it is on everyone's radar and is a practice that is being followed within your campus and within your school district. So how do we as teachers respond to these challenging behaviors? We first have to regulate our own behaviors. We cannot match a child's big behavior with a big behavior of our own. This is difficult. We have a lot of things we're doing as teachers, and we just want the behavior to stop. And so we often are just like the child, and we resort to means that we don't really intend to in order to try to get the behavior to stop, and all it does is escalates the behavior. So before responding to a child, take a deep breath. This intentional action gives you a moment to pause and reflect and decide the most appropriate response. We also want to make sure that we are using a calm voice with a child. They might be screaming in your face, and I challenge you to respond with a calm, kind voice back. We want to make sure that we're focusing on addressing the cause of the behavior. Behavior doesn't just happen out of the blue. There is something that causes it. So we want to try to figure out what that root cause is. A child might be telling us they are hungry or they're thirsty, and the only way they know to do that is by having a tantrum. They might also not understand what is expected, and so they're acting out. So we want to make sure we're not just trying to get them to calm down, but we're also trying to address the root cause of that behavior. When we're trying to get them to change their behavior, it's most important to tell them what to do rather than what not to do. When children are in heat of the moment, they don't hear that word not. It's really hard for the brain to process that word not. They're only hearing what to do. So make sure you iterate over and over what the expectation is and use as many visual cues as you can. Lastly, avoid using fear and avoid using threats. These do not help build a positive relationship that children need in order to have optimal social and emotional development. You are in control of your mindset, and it's easier for you to change your perspective than to change a behavior. I'm not saying we don't necessarily want that behavior to go away, but if we can see it from the perspective of a child that they are telling us they need something, it's easier for us to address that need than it is for us to address that behavior that's a result of that need. It's also important to not take it personally. Children do not display big behaviors to be disrespectful. They're not doing it because they don't like you as a teacher. They're doing it because they don't know what else to do. So seize it as a learning opportunity and not as a personal attack. So I want to reiterate some of the resources. Today's webinar went over a variety of strategies that can be used to mitigate both little problems and big problems. However, I know that I wasn't able to provide an exhaustive list of all the potential strategies out there. The strategies that were shared today will work with some children, but may not help all children. For specific help with a particular child, we encourage you to identify the resources you have access to, and also encourage you to build a sustainable approach to using these resources. Calling your administrator down to your classroom every single time there's a big behavior is not a sustainable solution. Figuring out how to work with the administrator to either get more support for this child or to get you the resources that you need to help build the skills with this child would be more sustainable than always relying on an administrator to help extinguish these challenging behaviors. There are a number of resources besides your administrators, and they include the teachers on your campus. This could be teachers within your grade level or another grade level. Between you all, you have a wide range of experience and have seen a wide range of children, and together can come up with helpful solutions. If you're in a small rural district and maybe you're limited in the number of the number of teachers on your campus, say there's only one teacher per grade level, and the kindergarten teacher is having a hard time, and the pre-K teacher doesn't know how to help, and the first grade teacher doesn't know how to help, reach out to a neighboring school district. I'm sure that other teachers outside of your district are also willing to share resources with you. You also have access to some incredible staff at your Education Service Center. They typically have both early childhood staff, but they also have behavior support staff that can come in and provide resources. There's also a wide range of nonprofit and professional organizations who develop both web-based and print-based materials. For a list of some of these materials, please see the handout section of your control panel. I want to thank you all so much for being with me this afternoon and taking a bit of your day. I know it's late in your day and you are all tired from the exhausting work that you all engage in. I'm going to take a little bit of time before we close out to answer some questions. I'm going to open up our control panel, my control panel, and look at some of these questions. As a reminder, I won't field any questions that are specific scenarios to students, but if you have any questions about the content that I presented, I'm happy to answer those at this time. Please type in your questions in the control panel under the questions tab. We're not seeing any questions come in, but we'll give it just a moment. So I see one question on how do we get an invite to the session on LRE for PPCD? If you wouldn't mind, let me know what that LRE acronym is. I might be able to point you in the right direction. Oh, my colleague Scott sitting next to me reminded least restrictive environments. I'm so embarrassed that I didn't have that acronym at hand. How do we get an invite to the LRE session for PPCD? This might be one moment. Oh, gotcha. I'm sorry. That was some chat going back and forth. Someone, Scott had asked in the chat box, what are some sessions that you want to see? And someone said session on least in restrictive environment for PPCD, and someone else wanted to know how they get access to that. We'll be working hopefully with our PPCD team to maybe bring that content to you all. So we're seeing a few questions about is this information going to be available after the fact, and it will. We will be posting a recording hopefully in the next few days of this webinar on our website, along with the PowerPoint and the handout, so you can access that and share it with colleagues and teachers in your district. I see a few more questions coming in. Let's see here. So I have a question. It reads, if a student is disrupting a classroom and not able to calm and accept reteach at the time, is a calm down room okay? We never want to leave a child unattended. So I would encourage you to make sure that if you're taking a child out of the classroom, that they are with another adult who is going to help them calm down. Children need to be taught explicit strategies and how to calm down. But we want to make sure that we are not using isolation as a go-to, and that it is done in a safe manner, and that parents are informed of when something like that is used. But best practice would be not to take the child out of the classroom, and if at all possible, to try to help the child calm down in that classroom. So I see a question on what are other ways than taking a deep breath and speaking calmly do you recommend for a big problem? And I will tell you that with all behavior issues, it really depends on the context of the behavior, the history of the child. So while you are using a calm voice, it does not mean that you cannot be direct and commanding of the child. It is just being mindful of how respectful you are. So there are sometimes we do want to use ignoring as a strategy for big behaviors. If behaviors are meant solely for the purpose of seeking attention. I see if you don't use color charts or clip charts, do you use anything else to help with behavior? There is a number of things that you can do. This includes there is different technology and apps that you can use to really track specific behaviors that children are displaying, and those could be both positive and negative behaviors. They provide a lot more detail for teachers to analyze and for parents to be informed about how their child went. The other thing is there are ways to have check-ins with children who are having those big challenging behaviors, because often those color charts and clip charts we only use with the children who are having those big behaviors, because they're the only ones, remember, that we need to tell them, go change your clip up or down. Children can benefit from visual reminders of how they're doing, but this needs to be done in a private manner. There are different ways that this can be done, and it's through visual schedules. And children, if they have a visual schedule and then there's an empty column next to it, they can themselves do things like a check mark or an X to think about how they were doing. Maybe that's during circle time, and then the next is during centers. There's a wide range of things that can be done, and I'm sorry I can't give you more specifics right now. We got a lot of different questions coming in. I'm going to try to answer a few more. So one great question is, what do we use to keep a student from having a tantrum? One thing to do is look at what we call antecedents, and that is the root cause of the behavior. So look what is happening before a tantrum occurs. This is going to take a few tantrums in order to then identify what those antecedents are. But what you want to do is you want to start identifying what is happening before a child escalates to a tantrum, and what are those signs that I need to be looking for as a teacher, so that way I can start teaching the skill that's needed then, because you can't teach a skill during a tantrum. It's not an opportunity for a child to learn. So as a teacher or administrator, you want to start trying to identify the indicators that a tantrum is going to happen and look to address the child's needs then. Okay, so there are a few other questions that I'm not able to answer right now, but invite you to reach out to your ESC, or you can send me an email. I'm happy to provide guidance where I'm able to. Thank you all so much for your time today, and appreciate your dedication out there in the field to our youngest learners here in Texas. Be on the lookout for the recording of today's webinar and the posting of handouts. Have a good one.